Awesome. Okay. Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here. And I'm really happy to be here with you tonight. So my name is Sawa, and I've got this title. I want to give you a quick spoiler that I won't be talking about how to make milk or any of those techniques. So if that's what you're here for, I'm so sorry. I'm not that person. But I will be talking about the history behind and how that impacts human nature. So I hope you're in for that talk. I will get to the point soon, but let me tell you who I am first. So I'm a cultural psychologist. Cultural psychology, what is that? Let's unpack this word. Let's forget about psychology for a minute and let's think about culture. When you hear this word culture, what do you think about? People, great. Anything? Traditions? Yeah. Art, yes. So typically, the people, traditions, I love those ones. Typically, though, when you hear the word culture, we tend to think about art, music, food, dance, all those beautiful things, like the music that we just had. And I'm sure Kelly will be talking about a lot of those beautiful things later today. And I love that. That's part of culture, and they are all really important. But today, I want to give you a different perspective. So I want to talk about kind of a more, I guess, science of culture. And this is where dairy farming comes in. So dairy farming started about 7,500 years ago in Central Europe. And when this agricultural lifestyle transition happened, it drastically and rapidly changed the biological makeup of humans. So what it changed, particularly as a byproduct of this cultural practice of dairy farming, is the tolerance for lactose. Lactose tolerance wasn't really very common for humans. Most humans, after the age of 5-ish, people used to get sick to drink milk. But because of dairy farming, a lot of people had changed their, well, they didn't really change, but biological makeups of humans changed. What I mean by this is that within that particular population, the variants of that particular trait, lactose tolerance, had been associated with survival rates. So people with biological tolerance to lactose was able to survive better compared to other people. So now today, in the regions with a long history of dairy farming, actually the lactose tolerance is over 70%. But in other areas, it's as low as lower than 30%. So this is what we call gene-culture coevolution. Culture influences the genetic makeups of humans. And I would argue that we need culture just like humans need water and oxygen to survive. And this becomes even more evident when we think about human evolution. So when we think about human evolution, humans are pretty successful animal in the way that if you look at around the globe, you can see human habitations everywhere, right? So in that aspect, humans are successful. So animals, any animals, including humans, adapt to the environment. But humans have gone beyond that. Humans have altered environment by making tools, housings, clothes. But why can we do this? What is the difference? So the argument is the way that we learn. Humans learn through culture. This cultural learning is the way we learn by watching others, and we also teach each other. Non-human animals can learn from others. For example, macaque monkeys, this one group of macaque monkeys in Japan have been found that there's this one particular monkey, he decided that he likes to wash his sweet potatoes in ocean water, because I guess that adds some salt and it tastes better. And they live on this island, so they have access to the beach. So this one monkey was doing this, washing sweet potato and eating, and other monkeys were watching that, and they started doing it, and it kind of spread around, but very slowly. And it only got to about 30 individuals. And after that, it kind of stopped. And when this one first monkey died, this information got stopped. It didn't survive. So again, non-human animals, they can learn socially by others, but it's not to a great extent. So what this means is that among those other species, there can be one really smart individual monkey or specific species. There are a lot of individual smart ones. But when they have this new great idea, that idea doesn't really get passed down. It just stops. So the next generation has to start from the scratch. And that's the difference for humans. Humans, we learn from each other and we teach each other. And this process of cultural learning is really, really amazing. And the process is called cumulative cultural evolution. So cumulative cultural evolution, because of this, from something really simple, we can go all the way to create something really complicated. And this has not been done just one person, right? We learn and we can make adjustments, we can make improvements across people and across generations. We can even collaborate with people who are dead, right? We can read something that other people have written. So really, we are standing on the shoulders of giants. And this ability that we can share information together, like a place like this is what's really, really amazing about human. So when I asked you at the beginning, what do you think about culture? The first person said people, and I loved that because we need people to have a culture, and we need people to have evolution for humans, right? And another aspect of humans is that humans have a pretty large brain, right? We know that we have pretty large brain, especially against our body size. And not only the size of the brain also takes a lot of energy. Our brain only weighs about 2% of our body weight, but it takes about 16% of our basal body metabolism. And this is quite a lot. For non-human animals, it's usually just about 1 to 3%. So human brain is such an energy hog, right? And our body had to adjust to that. So our muscle got weaker, our digestive tract gets smaller because we have to support our large and expensive brain. And how did this happen? Some people suggest that culture and brain interact. So some people suggest that the main driver for this expansion of the brain is in order to adapt to this accumulated cultural information. It's not genetic information, but it's cultural information. So when we started making all those tools or creating clothes by threading needles, we had to have better dexterity, so better fine motor skills. And in order to deal with those cultural products, maybe our brain had to get bigger. So this is called the cultural brain hypothesis. So a psychologist, Barbara Rogoff at UC Santa Cruz, had said that as a biological species, humans are defined in terms of our cultural participation. And I agree with her. So I want to give you a couple more examples of how our culture really impacts biological aspects of human beings. And as an example, because we're talking about evolution and kind of definition of species as biologically, let's think about other animals. So another animal, let's talk about giraffe, because I just like giraffes. Giraffe evolutionally started out with a size of a horse, right? But now giraffe has a very long neck. And obviously, they didn't practice to get long neck. It just genetically that the change happened, right? But it takes a long time. On the other hand, humans, we can learn, again, culturally, very, very quickly. Just overnight, we can share information with many people. And this has changed a lot of our behaviors in our lives. So, for example, the use of fire, right? Fire. Typically, the use of fire is associated with humans, specific to humans, right? It turns out that humans are not really good at making fires. If you raise a child without any knowledge of fire, and one day you say, make some fire, they can't really do that. It's very difficult. For many people, you probably realize it's really difficult to make fire, right? But once we learn this, culturally, the transmission happens very quickly. And I'm glad it does, because humans are the only animals that eat food that has to be cooked using fire, right? Any food, vegetables, fruits, if you eat raw vegetables all the time, that's going to create too much gas and that's going to make you uncomfortable because we have, again, small digestive tract, right, in order to keep our brain. Meat, same thing. We can't really handle raw meat all the time. We don't even have big enough teeth to chew raw meat. So biologically, we are really relying on cultural products like fire. Another example. I just want to give you a quick another example. Social learning. So I mentioned that social group, social network is really important for human behaviors and learning. So here's a really one quick example of how that works. So this is a map of the United States with different ways to call carbonated drinks. So the blue areas, people usually call it pop, right? The yellow ones are soda, Coke, right? And here's another map of the United States with religious practices or affiliations. Do you see the similarities between those two? Right? So the red areas are typically Baptist, blue ones are typically Catholic, some Protestant, Mormon, and there are other religious affiliations, but these two maps look pretty similar, right? But the values of religious practice and the way you call carbonated drinks are not related, right? So those two things that are completely unrelated oftentimes go together because religious affiliations are oftentimes where people create communities and have social networks, and that's where you learn a lot of different kinds of values. So this is, I think, a kind of a fun example of how we learn, again, from the social group. This is one last quick example. So going back to comparison to non-human animals, I really like this idea that, so in the social groups, so we talked about social groups. When there's a social group, typically there's a hierarchical relationships. So there's a dominant one and non-dominant ones. In non-human societies, such as chimpanzees, typically dominance is decided based on the power, so the size of the individual and the strengths, right? And their subordinates. Typically, in those societies, subordinates don't really like dominance. They don't get close to the dominance. They don't look at them. They back away from the dominance. So the one with the power is really isolated. On the other hand, in human societies, the power is oftentimes decided based on prestige. And prestige is oftentimes associated with more information and more knowledge. So in human societies, somebody with power, somebody with prestige is oftentimes liked, right? People want to listen to them. People want to learn from them. People want to be close to them. So the person with power actually is surrounded by many other people, and maybe that's another reason why information travels so quickly in human societies. And I just thought it was kind of an interesting idea. So what I do is that I have a lab at UW Green Bay, and unfortunately I don't work with chimpanzees and other animals. I wish I do. I do work with human animals, so I work with human children oftentimes. And they're beautiful, they're wonderful creatures that teach me a lot. So I have I'm a director of the Child's Lab at UW Green Bay, and we do a lot of different kinds of projects. Our most recent project right now is I have a collaboration with another professor, Dr. Jason Cowell, and we do we use a neuroscientific technique. So we use an EEG, and we try to look at brain activities of children. We have other projects. We ask them to answer some questions, tell us stories, all kinds of studies to look at cognitive and social development. But typically what I do is I study at least 2 different populations. So I study children here at Green Bay, and I collect data in another culture, and we do comparisons. The reason why I do comparisons is because culture for humans is kind of like water for fish, right? We can't really see it. We don't really think about our cultural practices in our daily lives. We just do what we do. Maybe some people started not shaking hands, and that was kind of a difficult transition for for us in this culture, right? This is our cultural daily practice. It's hard to change those things. So when we do comparisons, we can see that how culture impacts our lives. And it's not that one is better than the other, but there are just different ways of being, different ways of living, and it's okay. And I'm hoping that studying those cultural differences will help us to understand each other better, right? And appreciate each other better. Because when we think about everybody's the same around the world and people are doing something different from what you are doing, it's easy to say, that was weird. Or, we tend to think less of them. But it's not the thing, right? It's just different ways of living, and it's okay to be different. We should be appreciating, we should be celebrating those differences. So that's my hope, to better understand each other by conducting cross-cultural research. I'm going to skip this, and I just want to say thank you. Thank you very much.
I'll take the clicker. You keep the mic. Okay. Thank you, Sawa. All right. Commence questions, because I know you've got them. I've got one, if we need to let the crowd warm up. Okay. I'm wondering about, because you mentioned some traits that humans adopt and evolve that are kind of beneficial, like fire and things like that. But how do we undevelop traits that are passed down culturally that end up damaging humanity or our larger ecosystem and environment?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question, because when we think about traits, those are adaptation to the environment. So it's adaptation, so meaning that should be something good for our lives. But the cultural learning is really interesting, that we also learn culturally about something that may not be the best practice, right? So I was trying to think about a good example, and I couldn't really think about the best example of this, but one of the examples that sometimes I use in my class is that in some cultures, for example, in China, and this is not in practice anymore, but in China for years and years ago, it was foot biting was a practice that it was beautiful to have small feet for women. So women, from the times they were born, their feet were just wrapped in cloth so that it would just kind of carve up. And as they were really small, they couldn't even really stand up or walk straight. And those practices are not biological traits, right? But that was learned through culture, and it persisted for some generations, and it changes. And again, I don't want to put values to it. I don't want to say that was a bad practice, but it just kind of got stopped. So I think the environment is always changing and evolving. So with those environmental differences, or maybe social groups are different, maybe different cultures are meeting and changing their own ways of being. So I think there are many ways to change. How do we do this? I think that's a really good question. But humans are a really interesting species that we learn from, again, we learn from each other. So non-human animals, oftentimes the changes in their behaviors happen genetically and biologically, so only the biological parents can pass down the traits to their offsprings, but humans can do this horizontally, right? So it doesn't have to be vertical. You can learn from friends. You can even learn from your children. Right? So it's amazing that there's so many different ways to learn for humans. So I think there are many different ways to change. I don't think there's just one way. I don't know if that answered your question, but.
Thank you. So, we're all responsible for making the best.
Yes, we are all responsible. Yes, I agree.
Yes,
yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Now you're all primed up. What do you guys got for questions? In the back, center.
You said that the information is not passed on in non-human species. Is that mostly due to their isolation, or if they were more social, would that information be passed on?
That's a really great question. So how non-human animals pass on information? Was that the question? Sorry, okay, yes. So they can learn socially. They can learn by watching, but it's interesting that, so there was one example that the study was done comparing chimpanzees and human children. So in this particular study, they gave this box. First, this box was all black and you couldn't see anything. And the model comes in and he taps on the box with a stick, special stick. He pokes on it. He does all kinds of things. At the end, he pushes this one button and gets a treat. And then he showed that, and chimpanzees can follow really kind of complicated steps very well. Human children can also do that very well. Now, the next time they bring another box, now this time it's all clear. So you can see everything, what's going on. And you can see that all the pokings and taps had nothing. They were just false ceiling, and there was just nothing to do with actual thing. The last step, pushing the button, getting the treat, was the only thing that mattered. When that happened, chimpanzees, what do you think they did? They just skipped everything and just got the treat, right? Human children, what do you think they did? They followed the steps exactly how they were shown. Even though it was kind of obvious, it didn't really matter, right? So it's interesting. Yeah, and they did the study with adults, actually, and adults did the same thing mostly. They actually followed the steps for humans. So it almost looks like chimpanzees are outperforming humans in that sense, but maybe sometimes when you think about when you get a new job, or maybe you started a new school, you go there, sometimes maybe you travel to a new culture, you don't know why you're doing something, right? And you look around and you just kind of follow them, and then hoping that's the best way to do it, right? And sometimes that's true. Sometimes that's the best way to do it. So humans kind of have this great interest by learning from others. And see, the non-human animals can learn socially, but their goals seem to be slightly different from humans. That makes sense?
Can. Yeah. Okay. Put us in our place.
Yeah.
With the comparison.
Right? Can we do the experiment now?
Yeah. Right. So we got time for one more question, and then we'll be able to follow up with Sawa after. It's also in the back.
It's kind of along the same lines, but when you say that's because of like the need for humans to have cultural acceptance, I know that's an opinion based, but just on that.
That feeling, that need to, that sense of acceptance, like whatever that is in humans, is that?
Be like, I don't really care, I don't snap,
Yeah, I think, so I'm not sure if I'm answering your question directly, so we can talk about this more, but, so I think that for humans, we don't really realize that we need a culture either, right? We just, but for some reason, there is some biological piece that we are ready for culture. So humans are ready to be taught. So this idea that the human children follow all the steps kind of look crazy in this particular experiment. But when you're interacting with children, you kind of expect that, right? When you teach something, you expect children to do exactly what you are showing them to do. You know, I have my kids go to soccer practices, and when they do something crazy, I want to really tell them that you're doing something crazy. So that's something really unique, and that's a biological trait. So that's something that's biologically and genetically passed down to this group of species that we are biologically ready to be taught, and we are also ready to teach somebody else.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sawa.
Thank you.
That was fantastic.